All right, solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. So similar to our last example, what we want to do is we want to take this form and we're going to write it in vertex form by completing the square. So in order to do that, we're first going to factor out the coefficient of 3 out of the first two terms of my equation. So I'm going to factor out a 3, and I'm left with the x squared minus 2x. I'm going to leave a space, plus 2 equals 0. Our next step to completing the square is I'm going to take this 2, I'm going to divide it by 2 and square that value. So 2 divided by 2 would be 1, 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to add 1 inside my bracket. And now I want to balance this equation out. So remember, I haven't necessarily added 1, I've added 1 3 times, so technically I've added 3. So to balance this out, I'm going to subtract a 3. So then my last step to completing the square would be to factor this trinomial. So we'd get x minus 1 all squared plus 2 minus 3 is a negative 1 equals 0. So now we're at a point, just like last example, where we're just solving this using BEDMAS backwards. So our first step to solving this would be to add 1 to both sides. Our next step would be to divide by 3. Our next step would be to take the square root. So I can take the square root of 1, which would be 1, so this would be plus or minus 1 over root 3. And then our last step would be to add 1 to both sides of the equation. So here is my answer. Well, technically we never want to end up with a radical in our denominator, so we have to do a little bit more work here. We're going to multiply the top and bottom of this by root 3 over root 3. We still have this plus 1. So this is going to become 1 times the root 3 would be plus or minus root 3 all over 3 plus 1. All right, so this would be our final answer. I would accept this as your final answer, but you could go further and combine these values as one large fraction. So in order to do that, well, I need a common denominator between this fraction and this fraction. So 1 is technically a 3 over 3. So to combine this as one big fraction would be plus or minus root 3 plus 3 all over 3. This would be my final answer. So that is how you solve an equation by completing the square.